Well, good morning. I thought I'd do a similar report on this 1966 Shelby Mustang as I did on my Tornado. So I just got this out of storage the other day, and we'll take a walk around it, then we'll look at the engine, the interior, and then we'll go for a drive report. And along the way I may ask some questions for the Shelby aficionados out there who may be able to answer a few questions I have about the car. So I bought this car on eBay about 20 years ago. It had about 23,000 miles original, and now it has about 27,000. So I drive it about 500 miles a year, give or take. 200 miles a year. Anyway, you know, one of the things they talk about the 1966 Shelby is that it's a more refined car than the 1965. And that may be true, but if it is true, the 1965 car must have been a handful, because this, without power steering and without power brakes and 4-speed and a pretty throaty engine, is quite a handful in and of itself. So of course, you know what Carroll Shelby did, the legend, is he took stock Mustangs, 271 hypos, a 289 hypo with 271 horsepower, and then he worked on the engines, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But what kind of stands out for a 66 Shelby is the air scoops in the back that are functional to cool the rear brakes, which are drum, and then these plexiglass inserts where the vents used to be, and you can hear that's plexiglass. The bullet mirrors. This car has BF Goodrich radials, which most people put on their cars for comfort and performance. You know, the other question I would ask the Shelby people out there is this Cobra emblem here on the front fender. I don't see that on any other car, and I'm quite certain the car's original. So I'm a little questioning, you know, what is that badge, and it's on both sides. But it's a nice car. It's a you know, pretty much a stock Mustang that's been Shelbyized. The stripes, I believe, were put on by the dealer, and we'll take a look at the process. You can see how they kind of dulled over time, although the hood stripe is not as dull, and the hood is fiberglass over metal, and the paint is held up better on the hood stripe, and you can see that where the stripe is on the vent and then the hood. Lockdown pins, and then the serial number 6S340. So it was one of the first 100 cars in 1966 that wasn't a holdover. So for those of you who know, I think the first 252 cars in 1966 were really holdovers from 1965. And then the other thing we'll talk about is this alarm key. And you'll see that the car has a 1966 vintage alarm system, which is kind of fun. So with that, we'll conclude the exterior report. So where the interior is concerned, there's very, very little that keeps this Shelby, makes this Shelby different than a stock Mustang. And quite frankly, I like the round gauges, by the way. On the 65 they were the horizontal gauges, so I like the round gauges of the 66 and beyond. But this is really it, the tachometer. So that's really the differentiator. And then the other thing, again, asking the Shelby people out there, is this car has a Hertz linkage. So it's a 4-speed. But of course they didn't come with Hertz, so I'm assuming that the original owner, who was from Virginia or South Carolina, replaced the original Ford linkage with the Hertz. And for those of you who are old enough to remember, Hertz was very popular in the 60s. So it's got a plastic wheel, the sport mirrors, but everything else is just very standard Mustang, with the exception of the racing seat belts. So seat belts are kind of fun, and it gives a little bit of a feel of racing. The other thing that came with it is the starting instructions, and you know, it starts alright. It does have a manual choke down here, if you can see that. Sometimes it needs a little choke in the old days, and there's the vent pull. But and then the other thing is the brakes. The brakes are very hard at first because of the metallic pads, and it's a very heavy brake pedal, and we'll talk about that on the drive report. And then in terms of the mileage, so what are we looking at? 27,473, and I said I bought it, I think, with about 23,000, so that's 4,000 miles over the last 20 years. There was 5 years where I didn't drive it at all because I was just too busy with work and things. So that's the interior, and now we'll move on to the trunk and the engine. So it may be too bright to really see a lot of the detail, and if it is, I'll reshoot the video. But you've got a stock 289 high performance engine, and you know, whereas the interior really didn't have much difference, here's where the engine did. So it has a rather high manifold, I think a 715 CFM carburetor. Here's the tag. It's got that big hard fuel line to the carburetor. You can see the Coney shocks, the valve covers. It's got a modern battery with just an old-fashioned top on it. What's kind of fun is the front where the radiator is, has a screen over it. And then if I can show, I'll show how some of the dealer applied striping was done. And then you can see this brace, the racing brace. I think they call it a Monte Carlo bar. But here's something I want to show everybody, which I thought was fun. So here's the theft protection for a 1966 Mustang, which is really nothing more than a school bell. And I'll show where the electronic brain is in the trunk. But again, that bell is connected to that key, and there's a mercury switch, I think, in the trunk, and if the car shakes, I'm assuming the school bell goes off. The engine's very original, but it does have a few replacement parts. The fuel pump's been replaced, the master cylinder's been replaced, and the water pump's been replaced. Now, I have those original parts, and I plan to put the original water pump, fuel pump, and master cylinder back on the car to keep the engine with all matching numbers and authentic. But small black Ford, but it puts out a lot of power, and you'll hear it during the drive report. There's one of the switches for the alarm for the hood, and there's a similar switch like that in the trunk, which we'll see in a minute. About the hood for a second. So this is a fiberglass hood over metal, and what the aficionados will see is I've got one spring hinge on there and no hinge here, and then I just use a prop bar. And the thought is that you have to be very careful when you close this hood, because it's fiberglass and it can bend in the middle, so you don't want to put a lot of pressure on it, and the hinges and the spring torque might be too strong, so a lot of people put on special hinges and delete a hinge. So I did want to mention that. So what's nice about the trunk is you get to see some of the handiwork in terms of applying the stripes, and for those who are detail buffs, maybe they like that. There's that, I think it's a mercury switch, at least that's what I call it, for the alarm. And then over here in this cubby is the brains for the alarm system, and I'll pick it up and take it out so that it's easier to see. But they installed it on this piece of cardboard, or you know, MDF, and it's if you can see that, Sears and Roebuck. So this is how it performed security back in 1966. Other than that, just standard Mustang trunk with a spare. I do recommend that if you have an old car, you travel with a fire extinguisher, because you never know when a hose is going to go out, and it just doesn't have to be a gas line. It can also be a brake line, remembering that brake fluid's flammable. and if a brake line goes and it gets on a hot drum or an axle or an exhaust pipe, you could have yourself a problem. So, alright, and I've asked my 13-year-old helper to help me on the drive report. So we'll release the park brake. See the tach, so it's running a little over 1,000, which is a little too high. Alright, 4-speed, you really miss 5th and 6th. No power steering, so until it gets moving, it's pretty hard. Then we'll just go down the block. Heavy brake pedal. Only a single reservoir master, and those of you who watched the Tornado video know how I feel about that. Sounds good, doesn't it? Dual exhaust has a good sound from the 289, and the nice thing about no power steering is you get good road feel, so you really feel very connected to the road, and with the addition of the radials, it really is a nice blend. So we'll just see a kind of overcast day here in Colorado, but you can't tell, but I have a heavy brake pedal with those metallic pads. Sounds good, doesn't it? It's a nice car to drive, very tight, very compact. You know, it's always nice to have a stick. And sometimes I do think about putting a dual master in, but keeping it original is more important to me right now than the safety aspect. And now we'll come up. Oh, okay. And park brake. And that's the end of our drive report for the 1966 GT350 Shelby Mustang. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks. Here are the original Blue Dot tires. We'll take a look at them. So bias belt. So it may be hard to make out, but the size is 815 times 15. And then, you know, Goodyear. So the tires are in decent shape. They do hold air, and they are the Blue Dots, so that's kind of nice on the original wheels. So I just keep them. Maybe I'll put them on the car occasionally to show it or something like that, but they're good to hold on to. And one of the things I mentioned is getting and keeping the original parts on the car. So here's the original fuel pump, and you can see the serial number there. I had that rebuilt by a place out of California. Let me just check the name to give them a quick shout out. I think it's in Mira Loma, California, Hart, H-A-R-T. Then we had the original fuel pump rebuilt. And then a group out of Green Bay, Shelby Parts and Restoration, redid the master cylinder, what some people call the fruit jar. So these three parts will go back on the engine to keep it original. I've got these Coney shocks over here that I'm going to put on. They're new. And the current shocks, the original shocks right now, are bouncing too much. So I'll keep them, but put these on just for safety. But I would say, anytime a part comes off this car, you always keep it. And I had a gentleman do some work on the car, and we had to replace one of the seal beams, and he said, oh, you have to keep the seal beams because even those with the date code on the back are valuable. So again, I hope you enjoyed it, and enjoy the rest of the summer. Cheers.